Hello, family members. I hope you're having a wonderful day today. Um, I know a lot of people are talking about Project 2025. Um, but one thing that it made me consider was what my version of Project 2025 is. My conception of it is sort of a conservative fever dream of how they would like the country to be, completely divorced from any sort of legality or, need to accommodate the wishes of our fellow Americans as one would normally do in a democratic republic. But. And so I'm like, all right, let's do that. What would I do if I were in charge, starting with when the new president is inaugurated in January of 2025? And I've been thinking about it for a while. I even have notes. I'll need to consult occasionally so I don't forget anything. Now, because we're starting in January, certain things are in the order they are because of that. So don't think that necessarily it's an order of what I think is most morally important or politically important, anything like that. It's just what I thought could make the biggest difference the fastest, starting in January 2025. Okay. So, first thing that I would do is I would basically make it more expensive to be a landlord. Any person or entity that owns, residences that they do not occupy would be made to pay a significantly higher tax on them going forward, or can basically sell the residence to the government at a fair market price. And then the government would then be able to resell those properties at a fair price to someone who either is going to be a primary resident or someone who is willing to own it, knowing that they're going to have a fairly high tax on, non buildings they don't particularly currently reside within. Then use any funding that is made from that, the process of, gaining and selling houses and other sorts of housing buildings to fund some of the other things that come later. In the process of this, there will be a focus on getting all unhoused people into housing. One thing that just makes me sick about America is anywhere you go, you're going to see a lot of empty residences that people own for just, investments or, just sort of as like a plan B or whatever. It's just like, and it's just really frustrating to see so many places empty, especially in like cities or, very desirable locations. Like down here in Florida, there is this ugly eyesore of a condo building that was built in Cocoa Village near where my grandma used to live. And it not only is just horribly ugly and completely out of scale for all the buildings around it, but most of the units are closed up most of the year round. They have their hurricane shutters just shuttered, and nobody ever lives there. They're all like investment properties. And, we have people living on the streets, people who don't have safe housing. You don't have, in Florida, you need to have air conditioning or you're going to die. Like seriously. And there are people who are living in substandard housing while those, condos that probably should never have been built sit empty. And that just is very frustrating to me. So I feel like we need to shift a housing market that focuses on landlords and their rights and their profits and emphasizes and prioritizes making sure everyone has somewhere to live first before anybody worries about profits or investments. Okay. All right. I would also eliminate the Electoral College and implement ranked mail voting, universal mail voting, so everybody who wants to can vote by mail. Not that I would necessarily get rid of the local precincts, because I know that there's some people that's the preferred way of voting for them, and I think that's fine. But I feel like every resident in the United States should be able to vote from home, no questions asked, because voting is our right. Like, we should be going out of our way to make sure that everybody's right to vote is honored. The next thing that I would do would be healthcare. And I would just go for universal healthcare. I would say that all bills that are generated by healthcare providers just get rerouted to the government. And we work on some common sense like legislation on how to determine, you know, that people aren't abusing the system. You know, the thing is with healthcare, and this is something that I think applies to abortion specifically. It needs to be a doctor's choice and the patient's choice what is done. And anyone from the outside trying to impose some sort of moral boundary on what sort of things are ethical and what sort of things aren't ethical, I think that's kind of dubious. There certainly are doctors who would act in unethical ways, but for the most part, most doctors are trying to help their patients out. They'd like to see their patients get better. And if they say something needs to be done, or the best course of action is X, it should be their determination and with the consent of their patient. We just need to get rid of insurance companies completely. There's no reason why a doctor should have to ask somebody who's never met me if I'm allowed to have a medical procedure. That just doesn't make sense. And I feel like what we need to do is just get rid of the insurance agencies and start retraining those agents to do things like work for the government in various capacities, which I'll get to later on this list. I also think that we need to make sure that mental health care, dental health care, and optical health care are all included. Podiatry, all of it. There does not need to be any distinction because of what body part it is. You can get eye abscess in your tooth that would then infect the bone and go to your brain and kill you. Or you can have bad teeth and that can give you heart disease. If you're diabetic like I am, it's extremely important that you go to the doctor and get your eyes checked constantly. And there's a lot of different things, medical conditions that don't just affect the eyes, that going to the eye doctor regularly is going to help. Audiologists, hearing aids, all of that. All of that needs to be included in universal health care. And while we're at it, we also need to expand food stamps, food assistance, maybe come up with a federal program for that. We also need to expand the disability support that we give, both in accommodations in public places, making sure that everything has wheelchair access, making sure that there are places for people to, use restroom facilities that are appropriate for everyone. I would like to see also that when somebody makes a disability claim, it is assumed that it is true, and the government jumps in and helps. And then if through the course of treating that person, they come to find that they're committing fraud, then charge them for fraud. And, make them feel the consequences of their actions. I feel like in order to find a few bad actors, We are completely hamstringing the ability of most disabled people to be able to access services that they legally have a right to. And that's just ridiculous. Another thing that I would do is fully fund the IRS. Now, if we have, insurance agents that suddenly don't have jobs, they might be a good pick to get on the IRS team. And I would also change it so that in 26, instead of people having to do their own taxes, that we just send them bills. And you get your tax bill and you pay it. There's no, futzing around trying to, cheat the system or find every little loophole. Like, we just send you a bill, you pay it, and that's that. It shouldn't be this hard. And if we fully fund the IRS, we will be paid back in spades, because that's what happens when you fully fund the IRS, is it more than pays for itself. The next thing I would do is fast track dreamers and asylum seekers and get them, all the services they need, and help them get processed so that it can be determined what their permanent legal status is going to be. We need to get people out of that uncertain circumstance that they've been put in, a lot of them out of no, choice of their own, especially, people who have come here as children. They didn't choose this, but they're here and this is their home and this is their life, and we need to find a way to give them the security they deserve. We also need to fully fund and streamline the process of immigrating legally to the United States, and completely end any sort of quota system. America does better when we have influxes of immigrants. They work, they commit, they pay taxes, they contribute to the community, they help with growth of communities. Immigration is like a huge boon, and we need to make sure that we have a system in place where we can, make sure that we're filtering out anyone who shouldn't be here, but letting people in as much as, is reasonably possible, because we do better as a diverse nation. Talking about fully funding things, fully fund the Department of Education. That means free breakfast and lunch for all students. I would also like to see universal busing. Like here in Florida, we don't have universal busing. If you live within 2 miles of the school, then you have to walk. Well, what ends up happening is you have dozens upon dozens of parents sitting around outside of every school before and after drop-off time, because of it's just too hot. It's too hot to expect a child to walk 2 miles, go to school, and then come home, especially elementary school kids. I just feel like we need to have busing for everybody, everywhere. And I also feel like we need to end this localized schooling sort of thing, where the funding from a school comes from just the local area. So if you're in a rich neighborhood, you're going to have better schools than if you're in a poor neighborhood. That is discrimination. That's segregation. That is denying opportunities to people because they can't afford to live in a certain zip code. That's ridiculous. And so what I think we need to do is all taxing that goes to education funding needs to be in a federal pool, and all schools get an equal amount, and we collect what we need to fund the schools instead of trying to make the schools make do with some arbitrary amount that we've decided is enough for them. It's ridiculous. We also need more teachers. We need to pay them better. And we need to let teachers come together and figure out how we're going to reform our school system, because it is a complete and total hodgepodge. And so it is very difficult to know if a child is going to get a good solid education that's going to allow them to be an informed voter and a good citizen, depending on where they go to school. That's a mess. And so teachers are the ones who should be leading this, and instead of like legislators, because most people who work in government, most politicians, got their start in law, not in education. So what do they know about the practical realities of how you teach? We need, more teachers per child. Smaller class sizes are great. We need teachers' aides. We need all of the different support staff, guidance counselors and things like that, that helps children have better outcomes. And when we have children have better outcomes, then that means that we do become more meritocratic. And the people who have all the talent and the drive actually get all of the opportunities the same as anybody else. And that makes it easier for people who really can help this country by, some sort of innovation or some sort of new plan or new business or new whatever. Or the people who research science. There might be some epically talented scientists out there that never ever got anywhere near a lab because they grew up in the wrong zip code and didn't go to a good school and nobody was encouraging them. I mean, actually, I know somebody like that. I know somebody who is probably, if he had been evaluated, would be considered a genius. Like, if he decides he's interested in something, he literally becomes like the leading expert in the state of West Virginia on it. Like, he was like the leading guy on snakes in the entire state. Like, when the state needed something, they called him. Imagine what would have happened if he had had good education and all the opportunities of somebody who is from, some ritzy tax bracket. I mean, it's just ridiculous, right? I also would fully fund the EPA and all regulatory agencies. At the very least, we should be enforcing the laws that we do have. And it is really disgusting how we don't. When I was kind of thinking this through, I asked my mom, what's the one thing that you would do if you were just in charge of America to make the biggest difference, that biggest net positive? And she said, treat rich criminals the same as everybody else. And that really struck me, because I think she's right about that. If there was one thing you could do, that'd be a heck of a good change. And part of the reason why millionaires and billionaires and white-collar criminals of all sorts don't get treated by the justice system the way that other types of crime get treated is because our regulatory agencies are like grossly underfunded, and the people that are willfully breaking laws and not following the regulations are not being punished as the criminals that they are. And if we had a more robust kind of culture of regulation, just using what we already have on the books, I think we could see a significant improvement in justice, environmental justice, and also human justice. There's a lot of health outcomes that are determined by where you live as well. And I think stronger regulation could definitely help with that, actually enforcing the regulation that we already have. I would also nationalize prisons. I'm not certain if I would want to commute the sentences of people who are convicted of marijuana related offenses or pardon them, because I also would go ahead and decriminalize marijuana nationally. We need to have a more sensible drug policy than the one we do. The war on drugs would be over. And people who have low-level drug offenses, non-violent crimes of various types. I think we should just let them all out, honestly. Prisons are overcrowded, and one way that we could take care of that is commute some sentences and put people back into the community to do some good instead of having them in prisons that provide, honestly, some pretty cruel and unusual punishment. Like, solitary would be done. No more solitary confinement, as far as I'm concerned. And I feel like we need to move to a model that goes away from punishment to rehabilitation. So we need fewer people in prisons that we own. No more private prisons, because there's no reason why anybody should be profiting off of prisons, because then that puts a financial incentive to put more people in prison. We don't need or want that. That's bad. Bad, bad, bad for our community and our country. So, no more private prisons, and get less people in them and treat them better. Give them humane conditions, because we need to have everybody who is in prison, whether they're Donald Trump whenever he gets sentenced, if he were to get prison time, and any other criminal, we need to be able to say we can put the same prisoner in every place and they're going to be safe. They're going to be, given the correct services that they deserve, that they're going to be given respect as human beings. Because just because you've been convicted of a crime does not mean that you don't deserve respect as a human being. That's just absurd. So, let's turn prisons, instead of this rotating door where people go to learn to be better criminals, let's turn them into a place where they learn to be better citizens, and then hope they never have to come back. And if they do, figure out what we did wrong and do better. I also would go ahead and fully federally fund college and end college debt, because there are a lot of jobs that require a college education. And so I think that we need to give people the opportunity to get into those fields. I also believe that if we fully fund schools, they're going to be able to do research better. And research is something that's going to bring us national pride, Nobel Prizes and, international acclaim. But also, you never know when you're doing research where your research may end up causing benefits, because it is very possible that you can be researching something that has absolutely no practical application, and in the process come up with some sort of technique or idea or mechanism that does have practical applications. I mean, with the space program, we've seen that over and over again, where innovations that were made to work in space then can also be used here on Earth in a myriad of ways and sort of move our technology forward. And so I feel like we need to invest in our higher education and make it the envy of the entire world. And we kind of have that. The infrastructure's almost there, but then there's always these funding woes. And you take that out, I think it would make a huge difference. Next, let's go into infrastructure. So, of course, I would want to get roads and bridges up to best standards immediately. There's too many bridges that need to be replaced in this country. They're too old. And there are too many roads that are so rough and hard on your car that it's almost impossible to use them without causing major damage to your vehicle. And if we're going to have a road, it should be passable. I would also like to see some sort of public transit system, possibly starting out with the use of buses and shuttles, maybe on-call kind of shuttle service, so that anyone anywhere can get a shuttle to a bus, to a train, to a bus, to a shuttle, and get to somewhere else, whether it's a rural location or a city location. The easier we make it for people to use public transit. The more people use public transit, the less our roads get used. The less our roads get used, the less wear, the less we have to maintain them. Like, the less we're paying for gas, the less we're causing pollution. It needs to be a focus on making public transportation accessible to everybody in every situation. So that's always an option, and it's always affordable at the very least, and it's always reliable as much as it could possibly be. That's important. It would be very easy to do like EVs and maybe even EV buses and things like that. Although we do need, of course, to work on where we get our electricity from. But it is nice to get our infrastructure, our vehicles, to be things that can be used in with different types of energy generation, so that we can use electricity that we get from like renewable sources instead of just being stuck with oil, I would like to see high-speed, long-distance rail, as well as a lot more local rail. Maybe, like a national company. I mean, Amtrak just isn't cutting it. Sorry, we need better. And I do think that companies that have large employee population should be offering some sort of like shuttle service. Maybe if not from the worker's home, at least from some central location near where a lot of workers work, something like that. I think that if you have maybe 500 people on site, you need to be offering shuttles. That would make it a lot easier for people to not have to have a car, which would save them a lot of money, and also less cars on the road, and that has all the myriad of benefits that has. I would also focus on getting all of the lead pipes removed and make sure that every person has good quality water wherever they live. City, rural, suburban, everywhere. I also would make sure that we addressed the Western water crisis. When it comes to the allotment of how water is used in, like, say, the Colorado River, it's based on, fake numbers. And it's just completely unrealistic. And so that just needs to be changed. We need to talk about, water conservation, especially in the Western U.S. and here in Florida, and, anywhere that the population is growing and that there isn't necessarily enough water for everybody. As far as like legal reforms, number one, federal SLAPP law. Easy. SLAPP suits or strategic lawsuits against public participation basically are things that frivolous lawsuits that big corporate interests or rich, powerful people file to try to keep journalists or just independent people silent about their corporate practices. And so I feel like we need a federal anti-SLAPP law. I also believe that we need to have a right to a lawyer in all circumstances where a lawyer is necessary. So that means we need to have it as accessible to me to be able to consult a lawyer when I'm, say, signing any sort of contract or, getting a mortgage or, of course, the normal lawyer stuff like divorces and legal name changes and, child custody disputes and all of the normal things too. But I think that we need to, kind of circling back to the thing that I said about what my mom said, we need to make it so that the best lawyers that a person can buy, if you are poor and you're charged with a crime, you can basically get that kind of representation. Like, it needs to be equal. Like, Donald Trump's team And, the guy who, drove drunk the other night and hit a tree or whatever. Like, everybody deserves to have the same quality of representation. And so what that's going to mean is we're going to need to fully fund public defenders and make that job higher paying and higher prestige, because private lawyers, I think, definitely have a right to exist. There should still be private lawyers, but I feel like there needs to be a lot more public lawyers, a lot more accessibility to everybody to have that legal expert, because we need that. The laws are complicated in this country. People don't always know all of their rights. And if it was just universally available to them to consult a lawyer and not have to worry about how much is this going to cost me, they'd probably be making better financial decisions, better work decisions, all sorts of decisions. So I feel like we need to make lawyers a public utility. I also feel like we need to do some massive homeschool reform. There really aren't that great of standards, or even maybe standards at all, for homeschool. And honestly, homeschool is something that needs to exist. There are circumstances where it's going to be what's in the best interest of a child, but it needs to be rare and tightly regulated. I feel like children need to be exposed to their peers in the community, and they need to go to school. And in general, and when there are exceptions, it should be done with compassion, but should be thorough to ensure that the child's best interests are met. There is an idea that parental choice about how children learn is somehow paramount, and that is just wrong. A parent can make decisions, even with good intent, that are harmful to their children. And every child is entitled to an appropriate education. They deserve to have access to an appropriate education so that they can then make informed decisions about their own life and live their life the way that they are free to. And the idea that a child needs to be molded by their parents to live a certain way is just silly, because that's not how kids work. You don't get what you want, you get what you get with a kid. And so people who in their vanity think, I can do better than the school, but I have no education training, and I don't actually know what I'm doing at all. They don't have any business deciding that it's in their child's best interest to deprive them of an